Hi, I'm Patrick Nellbone, and this presentation is entitled Mind as a Nonlinear Dynamic System and Wilfred Bion as a Paradigm Shifter for Psychoanalysis. This is a much condensed version of a previous presentation I gave at the eBoard 2016 conference. It is also based on my doctoral dissertation completed in 1974, which was a model of thinking, or mind, from the perspective of systems theory and structuralism. It is a multidisciplinary, multi-vertex exploration, and as such, there may be ideas that seem unfamiliar or terms presented in a way that seem contrary to customary usage, in particular when it comes to a traditional psychoanalytic viewpoint. My hope is that you will bear with me as I offer this to you as an experiment in letting go of memory or desire, so to speak. And possibly something absolutely new, challenging, and useful will emerge, and hopefully at least enough for a lively discussion later on. I see this contemporary version, also a model of mind, as an expression of an overarching metaphysical paradigm shift regarding the fundamental nature of reality, a multidisciplinary scientific revolution, and a postmodernist meta-narrative, all emergent in the 20th century and continuing today. This presentation also views Wilfred Bion as a change agent in this ongoing metaphysical and scientific paradigm shift, and suggests that his work lays the foundation for an integrated model of psychoanalysis for the future that incorporates the concepts of nonlinear dynamic systems theory. It also involves an ontological and epistemological paradox, as is posed on this slide. What is the nature of existence? Where does it begin? And how do we know what we know? And the paradox we encounter. Reality is not what you thought it was. Reality is what you think it is. My guess is that most of us here are psychotherapists. So why should any of us care about this at all? Is it just philosophical nonsense? Does it have any real relevance to the work that we do? For each of us, each with a different mind and different life experience, the answers will likely be different as well. My intention here is that this presentation might help each of us, 1, use better what we already know best, what we have learned of psychoanalytic theory through training and study, and as it evolves in our current work and world, and one's own subjective learning from experience in clinical practice. And 2, navigate the encompassing paradigm shift that is already underway in our world with a better roadmap that applies to our overall metaphysical perspective of what reality is, what mind is, and also to psychoanalytic theory and practice as we understand it and see it evolving. Specifically, this presentation should also introduce you to a nonlinear dynamic system perspective regarding the nature of mind and meaning making, how change occurs on multiple levels through clinical intervention, and how psychoanalytic theory and practice might evolve through the integration of nonlinear dynamic systems concepts. So here is a quick look, a glance ahead at several images from the roadmap. They include both basic systems concepts and psychoanalytic concepts configured as nonlinear dynamic systems. There is also a model of brain functioning we will briefly look at. There's not enough time for a thorough exploration, but I will try to give enough to represent how the concepts as a whole are more than the sum of the parts. You might also take a quick look at the crib notes I handed out at the beginning of the session tonight. Before going down the road with our map, however, I'm first going to offer a definition of mind. I am proposing a model of mind as a complex, nonlinear dynamic system that is subjectively and phenomenologically experienced by an individual human being. Mind is a self-organizing whole, an open system operating as a subsystem within a larger context of reality that encompasses both the bioenergetic system including the substrate of the human brain, and a sociosymbolic system, a semiotic system of language and culture. These three systems are independent wholes, as well as interdependent parts of reality, integrated as a whole, a system. They share information across boundaries, with each influencing the others, causing change reciprocally. Information here is the emergent quality or differentiation between figure and ground. It arises as dynamic tension occurs between parts in a system, causing parts to bifurcate or separate. A bifurcation or caesura in Bion's terms. Information is also the difference that makes a difference. That is, it influences change and is the basis for meaning making. And it occurs in a constant cycle of parts separating and parts joining, forming new systems in a more complex and differentiated context. These remarks about information are important to our discussion and lead us now to reality as theorized through quantum physics and the role of an observer who perceives differences and makes measurements. In the metaphysics of contemporary quantum physics, the physical and energetic nature of reality is not directly provable if we simply assume the pre-existence of irreducible, three-dimensional objects traveling along precisely measurable, causally deterministic linear pathways in space and time. Instead, with space and time integrated into a unified continuum of space-time plus information, what we know about reality is always dependent on an observer, a living organism, and the location of the observer relative to a gravitational field. Information in this view is the perception and determination of movement away from entropy and chaos or disorder to negentropy, increased order, organization, and wholes functioning as systems. It is also a registration of influence from one part of any system to another part, resulting in a causal change. It is through this perspective as well that we can now postulate that reality cannot be proven to exist separately from an observing mind, but instead that mind and reality reciprocally interact. For a living organism, it is how it acts upon and within the world, as an object itself among objects interacting continuously and reciprocally. It is first of all sensory and subjectively experiential, not representational. The basic principles by which it functions have always been present. It is an equiprimordial phenomenological experience of an embodied organism resolving uncertainty as to whether a difference exists. Is something the same or is it not? Operationalizing that information is a choice, either no or yes. Is it real? It is a reciprocating process, constantly changing. Mind is a constant transformation in O. This viewpoint is also compatible with chaos theory, complexity theory, and other versions of nonlinear dynamic systems theory. Nonlinear dynamic systems theory is a framework for applying these ideas to real systems and problems in our world. It is a way of modeling, making a map that we understand is not the actual territory. In this view, reality itself is seen as a system consisting of parts that are dynamically interrelated. All these parts are subsystems related organizationally and multidimensionally, and may include parts that are physical, energetic, or abstract, and symbolic in nature. Each part is a system itself, a whole consisting of other parts or systems that are also wholes, and each whole is greater than the sum of its parts. It is also a model that allows us to understand how all systems exhibit ecoprimordial organizing principles, that is, qualities that have always existed in reality itself, the thing in itself, in Kant's terms, versus how it appears to us. These organizing principles manifest as properties found in all open systems, theoretically from a microcosmic, subatomic level to a supergalactic, macrocosmic level, past, present, and future. Among these principles is the quality of isomorphism, or congruence in structure and process among all systems, with near equivalence in patterns, universally. Because this quality is always present, the three systems in my model of mind noted earlier are able to exchange information across boundaries and influence change in each other reciprocally. It also applies to psychoanalysis, of course, and thus suggests a path for future formulations for teaching and clinical practice. And this relates to the ontological and epistemological paradox involved in this highly significant metaphysical paradigm shift, because it also requires a change in the way we view classical psychoanalytic theory. Freud, first of all, a neuroscientist, essentially developed his model of mind in terms of the human brain being an organic form of matter, and that neural action, instinct, and drives are the primary source and causes of mental experience and behavior, both conscious and unconscious. It is fundamentally a deterministic model no longer consistent with modern quantum mechanics and nonlinear dynamic systems equations that take into account relativity theory and uncertainty. This shift in perspective better fits psychoanalysis as we have come to understand it in practice, with its emphasis on the abstract, uncertain, and constant, emergent meaning-making exhibited by the human mind.
That not only has an anatomy and a physiology, but also a mind.
This new view also seems contrary to our traditional common sense view of reality, and so requires effort to push beyond what we take for granted with little question or concern. In this view, there is no separation from observer and observed. Instead, reality is created by the observing mind's abstract organization of perceived, emergent parts into a system as a new whole. This is Bion's notion of beta elements being processed by alpha function, or minus k versus plus k. We can also see the implications here of Bion's notion of binocular vision and reversible perspective, and multiple vertices as ways of moving from a positivist view to a way of interweaving sources of influence through a contact barrier between conscious and unconscious, and reality or O. In this view as well, perception is considered a primordial intentional process, an ecoprimordial phenomenological experience of a human being as an embodied living organism, agentically acting upon and within the world, as an object itself among objects, interacting continuously and reciprocally, as a whole among other wholes. And what is meant by reality is always qualified by uncertainty, accounted for by measures of dynamic probability. Before going further, however, I wish to offer a simplified depiction of what a system is. This is represented here by this basic model of a system, as an open, dynamic, self-organizing whole, due to the ongoing alternation of parts separated to parts joined, and the emergent differences as parts interact. It's a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. Here we see that systems exhibit boundaries, input of information, energy, or matter, transformation, and output as negative corrective feedback, and feed forward. Systems exchange information reciprocally with other systems, adapt to changes in the environment, and are goal-oriented. Their parts exhibit differentiation, specialization, and are hierarchically organized. I'm not going to present additional descriptions of system properties tonight, but simply wish to emphasize how these properties are found in all systems generally, at all levels, and are considered the organizing principles that are equiprimordial or always present. They apply to everything we categorize in the bioenergetic realm, the sociosymbolic realm, as well as to the way mind is organized. For example, a new thought emerging in an individual mind, or in a clinical dyad in a moment of reverie, creating a new system within the shared reciprocal context. In clinical work, this model is of particular value because it emphasizes the recursive nature of thought itself, as well as the parts of a story that eventually can be understood within a more complex narrative, for example, or a pattern that readily reveals trigger points of a defense against pain and the acceptance of reality. This model also offers a dynamic building block from the chaos of beta elements, disorganized bits of information, to wholes that fit into larger systems. This might include our own psychic material as we find it interweaving with our clients in a mutually created space. It cannot always be easily seen or interpreted in the moment because so much is unknowable by the human mind directly. But by using the dynamic systems models I am proposing, coupled with psychoanalytic thinking and complementary methods of listening and interpreting, we can better understand how meaning-making and change actually occur. I believe it strengthens, what comes from intuitive discovery, from reverie in the moment, and enhances trust in the analytic process itself, even as reenactments occur that seem disruptive. It also offers greater consistency in interpreting patterns and metaphors that gradually reveal a truth being sought, and further facilitates healthy adaptive change, and sometimes achievement of desired goals. This second diagram further emphasizes the iterative pattern of different systems interacting, or a single system going through changes in time, or phase states, and generating interlocking feedback loops that carry information, both forward and backward and between subsystem parts, and to other systems in complex synchronous and asynchronous patterns. In this model, when we consider multiple levels of exchange, with the registration of information being the influencing factor and not necessarily energy or physical matter moving linearly through space and time, what is realized is that change can occur in different parts simultaneously as context changes, and causal factors may be non-sequential. Later, I will present a systems model of projective identification based on these principles. First, however, I would briefly like to show a neuroscientific model that I believe is cutting edge. What this model definitely does not do is attempt to locate specific parts or regions of the brain that directly correspond to the components of Freud's models of the mind, such as his topographic or structural models. Moreover, when it comes to identifying either a part or a whole brain function that deterministically produces subjective meaning-making or consciousness of self, neuroscience in general has not yet been successful. A neuroscientific model, however, that somewhat addresses this problem is that offered by Hobson, Hong, and Friston at Harvard, and is depicted here. In this model, real-world perceptions acquired in awake states are re-encoded during sleep, and the brain has a virtual reality generator that tells itself a story about what is probably real. It then tests this paradigmatic story with subsequent interactions in the real world. Using innate organizing principles, it constantly creates its own version of reality, including, for example, a workable three-dimensional space-time model of the physical universe that gradually develops into a best-fit algorithm. This research is not proposing that there is an actual physical component in the brain that is this generator, but only that the brain manifests these phenomena via these organizing principles that are understood as equiprimordial. Ultimately, it remains a black box, a representational model of a phenomenon. More importantly, we are faced with the understanding that reality, as it is subjectively experienced, is inseparable ontologically and epistemologically from the mind of the observer. As the physicist Max Planck said, I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing, is postulating consciousness. The significance of this for psychoanalysis is that the model of mind that evolved with Freud and his followers is less viable in terms of understanding the nature of mind, its mechanisms, or how therapy works to facilitate change. Mind is not simply a derivative of the biological and energetic substrate of the brain, and does not directly correlate with empirical observations of neural activity. So, if it is not simply matter first or brain first and then mind, what then is mind? Each of the independent systems in my tripartite model, including the individual mind itself, can best be understood as information-bearing dynamic open systems, or wholes that interact to form a larger whole that is commensal with reality. These wholes operate under always existing equiprimordial organizing principles, essentially qualities or properties that are abstract and interdependent and evident in all systems. Earlier, I made note of how we can think about the bioenergetic substrate of the brain in nonlinear dynamic systems terms, in respect to the brain's capacity to obtain information through perception, and how, through neural coding, it subsequently revises and tests its data as an operational model or algorithm. A similar process occurs when we include information that is encoded representationally in language and cultural experiences. This is the sociosymbolic system. In this system, meaning-making occurs by the processing of information and the creation of abstract wholes that carry meaning according to the same organizing principles operating in all systems. It is also the same coding process open systems exhibit to translate informational equivalents and input to another system. However, because of time limitations tonight, I'm going to skip over this section and simply show you a semiotic model of signifiers and signifieds forming signs. This model shows the combination of a real rose as the signified with the word rose to form a sign. The important thing is to think of these as abstract forms, like mathematical functions, and not reductively as constant physicalist units. In addition, they are not only linguistic representational forms, for example, the basis by which we generate metaphor, but also may be functions that are non-linguistic, proto-mental, and physical, embodied transactions dense with information and meaning. My proposal here is that they apply to psychoanalysis as well, for example, in understanding transference and countertransference, and if understood and integrated, can be better for psychoanalysis going forward. Psychoanalysis is changing. There is clear evidence that the traditional models of mind and the goals and manner of conducting psychotherapy are making way for a radically different perspective and new ideas that reflect this paradigm shift. Wilfred Bion was always thinking about change in a larger way, as you can see here.
Simply in an embryological state of development of human civilization.
For many, he has long been considered a transformative figure in psychoanalysis, and it is my contention as well that his ideas in part reflect the zeitgeist of our times and are part of a postmodernist meta-narrative and scientific revolution. Because of time limits, I am not directly pursuing this tonight, but instead will skip to graphic models that reflect an integration of nonlinear dynamic systems thinking with Bionian concepts. Okay, let's take a look. The first model is one of projective identification. From a nonlinear dynamic systems perspective, projective identification is a process in which two individuals interact and communicate with information transfer on multiple levels involving interlocking recursive feedback loops. At a very high level of complexity, projective identification can be understood both as a shared contextual process of meaning-making and the process that manifests as the subjective phenomenon of mind in each individual. This next model, with animated graphics, illustrates complex dynamic processes involving several Bionian and nonlinear dynamic systems concepts. It was originally developed for a previously presented paper on Bion's notion of catastrophic change and the multi-generational transmission of trauma. In it, we view catastrophic change as a normal and fundamental part of human communication and mental functioning, and as an integral part of projective identification. The model also emphasizes the isomorphism, a congruent mathematical or metaphorical mapping in structure and process between key Bionian concepts and the organizing principles or properties of nonlinear dynamic systems, offering a more contemporary and comprehensive understanding of a psychoanalytic model of mind. Here the model first establishes the idea that an individual mind exists within reality, or O, with a diffuse boundary or contact barrier in Bion's terms. With projective identification in Melanie Klein's version, the infant unconsciously projects unwanted or troublesome internal objects onto the mother, who receives them and then contains them. This was also considered the basis for transference and countertransference in the analytic dyad. Klein's version was the beginning of a bipersonal model upon which Bion further elaborated. In that transition, Bion incorporated Klein's paranoid schizoid and depressive positions as occurring in both parties and eventually added a transcendent position. He also gradually saw a reciprocal process in which transference and countertransference were mirroring equivalents and part of a single dynamic system. This is better understood when projective identification is viewed as a pattern of recursive interlocking feedback loops. In addition, in linking projective identification to Bion's notion of catastrophic change is seen as a quality or property inherent in the dynamic nature of O. It is an event producing a subversion of the order of things and how meaning is made as a result of such change. It is a normal form of change, indicative of uncertainty and the normalcy of chaos. It is a quality among others that can be known by experience but not easily recognized by human minds as the necessary quality for differentiation of the observing mind from O. In the language of nonlinear dynamic systems and biosemiotics, catastrophic change is a form of bifurcation, an equiprimordial phenomenon of reality. It can be understood from the larger context of a constant flux in which it is only one stage in a process that includes attraction and joining, preceding the catastrophic change. It is one aspect of a transcendent overview, symbolically represented with the graphic image of the Mobius strip and incorporating the paranoid schizoid and depressive positions. Projective identification is the process of the mind's agentic engagement in this dynamic transformation, and the concept of the container-contained is also the analog of projective identification in analytic therapy. What I wish to emphasize here is how projective identification is not only a process and component part of a larger system, but also as a subsystem, it isomorphically displays the same organizing principles found in every level in the larger system. We move now to another model that draws upon Bion's work to explore the isomorphism between his radical perspective of psychoanalysis and nonlinear dynamic systems principles. In this model, we see Bion's grid reconfigured as a nonlinear dynamic system. Here is Bion's grid as it is typically depicted from his book, Transformations, Change from Learning to Growth, published in 1965. And here is a proposed nonlinear dynamic systems version. This model is multi-axis and multidimensional and also assumes a bipersonal intersubjective field between the analyst and the analysand, both of whom are agentic minds acting on the world and independently making meaning. As it is presented here, I am retaining Bion's two axes with the horizontal or y-axis representing the notion of thoughts without a thinker, and the vertical axis representing the mind that thinks them. This model, however, conjectures that within any given three-dimensional cube, we imagine an interplay between the minds of both the analyst and the analysand, the interlocking feedback loops of an ongoing process of projective identification, diachronically across time, as well as vertically or synchronically among levels at any phenomenologically experienced temporal phase state. It further assumes the existence of networks of recursive loops, goal-oriented trajectories of transformation, and the exchange of information within a larger environmental context. Leaving out the Bionian notational references, I next offer a somewhat different conceptualization of the analytic dyad. This model depicts the two members of the analytic dyad, each with an individual mind. In this view, each mind is a phenomenologically and subjectively experienced, boundaried, agentic, nonlinear dynamic system. These individual mind systems interact with each other within a larger context, a shared reality, or O. This context is also characterized here by the physicality and energetic nature of the bioenergetic world as we know it through experience, and also by the sociosymbolic system of language and culture. As was discussed earlier, these interacting systems transfer information by means of biosemiotic mechanisms such as metaphor and metonymy, and the generation of signs as naturally occurring functions in all systems. They manifest in the individual human being in transformations that we understand as the qualities and experiences that distinguish every unique meaning-making mind as a system.